What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actresses walks into what she thinks is a friendly morning show interview, only to find herself facing a host determined to tear down her legacy? What unfolds is a battle of wits that exposes the dark underbelly of television journalism and leaves viewers questioning everything they thought they knew about their favorite morning show. This is the story of how Meryl Streep, the woman who has captivated audiences for decades, found herself in the fight of her life against a host who seemed more interested in creating controversy than conducting journalism. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really happened behind the scenes. The morning started like any other at the Good Morning America studios in Manhattan. Meryl Streep arrived early, as she always did. Her silver hair perfectly styled and wearing a navy blue blazer that exuded both elegance and authority. She had done hundreds of interviews over her illustrious career, and this was supposed to be a standard promotional appearance for her latest film. The producers had assured her publicist it would be a light, friendly conversation about her new role and perhaps some reflection on her incredible journey in Hollywood. George Stephanopoulos sat behind his desk, shuffling through his notes with an intensity that seemed unusual for what was scheduled to be a typical celebrity interview. His production team had been buzzing with excitement all morning, whispering about questions that would really make headlines and show what real journalism looks like. There was an energy in the studio that felt different, charged with an anticipation that had nothing to do with celebrating Streep's latest artistic achievement. As the cameras began rolling, Stephanopoulos flashed his trademark professional smile. But those who knew him well could see something calculating behind his eyes. "We're here with the incomparable Meryl Streep," he began, his voice carrying that familiar authoritative tone that had made him a household name. "Meryl, thank you for being with us this morning." Streep smiled warmly, settling into her chair with the grace that had made her a beloved figure for generations. "Thank you for having me, George. I'm always happy to be here." But instead of the expected question about her new film, Stephanopoulos leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting to something more serious. "Meryl, I want to start with something that's been on a lot of people's minds lately. Your political activism over the years has been quite vocal. Some critics argue that celebrities like yourself should stick to entertainment rather than weighing in on complex political issues. How do you respond to those who say you're overstepping your bounds?" The question hung in the air like a challenged smile faltered just slightly, not from fear or uncertainty, but from surprise at the aggressive tone. She had expected to talk about her craft, her process, maybe share a funny story from the set. Instead, she found herself being interrogated about her right to have opinions as an American citizen. "Well, George," she replied, her voice maintaining its characteristic poise, "I think the beauty of living in a democracy is that every citizen has the right to express their views. Whether you're an actor, a teacher, a plumber, or a journalist, we all have a stake in the direction of our country. I've never claimed to be an expert on everything, but I have claimed to be a citizen who cares deeply about the issues that affect all of us." Stephanopoulos nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't satisfied with that response. "But don't you think there's a difference between being a concerned citizen and using your platform to influence millions of people? When you speak at award shows or make political statements, you're not just sharing an opinion, you're wielding significant influence. Shouldn't that come with more responsibility?" The conversation was already taking a turn that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable. Streep could feel the shift in energy, the way the crew members were glancing at each other with concerned expressions. This wasn't the interview she had agreed to, and it certainly wasn't what her fans were expecting to see on their morning television. "I think influence comes with responsibility." "Absolutely," Streep responded, her voice growing slightly firmer. "But I would argue that my responsibility is to be authentic, to speak my truth, and to encourage others to think critically about the world around them. I'm not telling people how to vote or what to believe. I'm sharing my perspective and hoping it contributes to a larger conversation about the kind of society we want to live in." Stephanopoulos pressed on, his questions becoming increasingly pointed. "But when you made those comments at the Golden Globes a few years ago, weren't you essentially telling millions of viewers that their political choices were wrong? Wasn't that crossing a line from entertainment into political advocacy?" Streep's eyes flashed with something that might have been annoyance, though she kept her composure. "George, I think you're mischaracterizing what I said. I spoke about the importance of empathy, about protecting the vulnerable, about maintaining dignity in our public discourse. If those values are political, then perhaps we need to examine what our politics have become. The tension in the studio was palpable. Now, what was supposed to be a celebratory interview about one of America's greatest actresses had turned into an interrogation about her right to have political opinions. Stephanopoulos seemed determined to push the conversation into increasingly uncomfortable territory, as if he were more interested in creating a viral moment than in honoring his guest's remarkable career. "Let's talk about your influence on young actors," Stephanopoulos continued, seemingly ignoring the defensive shift in Streep's posture. "You've been called the greatest actress of your generation, maybe of all time. Young performers look up to you. When you make political statements, aren't you essentially indoctrinating the next generation of Hollywood into your worldview?" This time, Streep's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Her back straightened, her eyes narrowed slightly, and her voice took on an edge that those who knew her recognized as dangerous territory. "I'm sorry. Did you just accuse me of indoctrinating people? George, I think you need to be very careful about the words you choose." The studio fell silent, except for the hum of the cameras. Everyone could sense that something significant was happening, that this interview was spiraling into territory that no one had anticipated. Stephanopoulos, however, seemed energized by Streep's reaction, as if he had finally gotten the response he was looking for. "I'm simply asking whether you consider the impact of your words on impressionable young people who admire you," he replied, his tone suggesting innocence, while his words carried clear implications. Stre leaned forward in her chair, her decades of experience commanding rooms and stages evident in every gesture. "Let me be very clear about something, George. I have spent my entire career encouraging young actors to think for themselves, to question everything, to bring their own experiences and perspectives to their work. If you think that constitutes indoctrination, then perhaps you don't understand what education and mentorship actually look like." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Stephanopoulos shifted in his seat, realizing that he had awakened something in Streep that he might not be prepared to handle. But instead of backing down, he doubled down on his aggressive approach. Perhaps thinking that pushing one of Hollywood's most beloved figures to her breaking point would make for compelling television. "Meryl, I think you're being a bit defensive here," he said with a condescending smile that made several crew members wheeze. "I'm simply trying to understand how someone in your position reconciles artistic expression with political activism. Surely you can see how some people might find it problematic when entertainers use award shows and interviews as platforms for political speeches." Streep's expression grew colder, her legendary composure beginning to crack in a way that revealed the fierce intelligence and strength that had carried her through decades in an industry not known for its kindness to women. "George, what I find problematic is a journalist who seems more interested in creating controversy than in having an actual conversation. You invited me here ostensibly to discuss my work, my craft, the film I've poured my heart into for the past year. Instead, you're treating me like I'm some kind of radical activist who needs to justify my right to have opinions." Stephanopoulos leaned back, his expression suggesting he was enjoying the conflict. "But isn't that exactly what you are? When you stand up at awards ceremonies and deliver what are essentially political speeches, aren't you using your platform as an entertainer to push a specific agenda?" The question was so loaded, so deliberately provocative that even the teleprompter operator looked uncomfortable. Stress stared at him for a long moment, and those who knew her work could see her drawing on the same intensity that had made her performances so unforgettable. "An agenda," she repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "George, if caring about human rights is an agenda, if believing in equality and dignity for all people is an agenda, if thinking that leaders should be held to basic standards of decency is an agenda, then yes, I suppose I have an agenda. But I would call that being a decent human being." Stephanopoulos pressed forward, seemingly oblivious to the growing tension, not just from Streep, but from everyone in the studio. "But don't you think there's a difference between personal beliefs and using your celebrity status to influence political outcomes? When you criticize political figures, you're not just expressing an opinion, you're mobilizing your fan base." Streep's laugh was sharp and incredulous. "Mobilizing my fan base, George, do you hear yourself? You're talking about me as if I'm some kind of puppet master controlling the minds of millions of people. My fans are intelligent, thinking individuals who are perfectly capable of forming their own opinions. If anything I've said has resonated with them, it's because it reflected values they already held." But Stephanopoulos wasn't finished. In what would later be seen as a catastrophic miscalculation, he decided to go even further. Let's talk about specific instances. Your speech at the Golden Globes, where you criticized the former president without naming him. Many people felt that was inappropriate for an entertainment event. You used your moment on stage to make a political statement that had nothing to do with why you were there. The studio had gone deadly quiet. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath. Street's face had gone through several expressions from surprise to anger to something that looked almost like pity. "George," she said, her voice now carrying the full weight of her years of experience and authority. "I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you suggesting that when I used my platform to speak about the importance of respecting the dignity of all people, about protecting the free press, about standing up for those who cannot speak for themselves, that this was somehow inappropriate?" Stephanopoulos nodded, apparently missing the danger in her tone. "I'm saying that award shows are supposed to be celebrations of artistic achievement, not political rallies. People tune in to escape from politics, not to be lectured by celebrities about their voting choices." What happened next would be replayed countless times on social media and analyzed by media critics for weeks to come. Stress stood up from her chair, not dramatically or with theatrical flair, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had reached the end of their patience. "George, I need to stop you right there," she said, her voice carrying an authority that commanded absolute attention. "What you're describing as a political speech was actually me talking about basic human decency. If you think that advocating for kindness, for truth, for the protection of vulnerable people is somehow a partisan political statement, then we have a much bigger problem than you realize." Stephanopoulos looked momentarily taken back by her standing, but he pressed on. "Meryl, please sit down. We're in the middle of an interview." "No," she said simply, the word carrying more power than any dramatic monologue she had ever delivered on screen. "I will not sit down while you mischaracterize my words and my intentions. You brought me here under false pretenses, George. You told my publicist this would be a conversation about my work, about my craft, about the things I'm passionate about as an artist. Instead, you've spent the entire time trying to paint me as some kind of radical activist who has overstepped her bounds." The host was clearly losing control of the situation, his carefully planned ambush backfiring in spectacular fashion. "Meryl, I think you're overreacting. These are legitimate questions about the role of celebrities in political discourse." Streep's eyes flashed with something that might have been contempt. "Legitimate questions? George, you haven't asked me a single legitimate question. You've made accusations disguised as inquiries. You've suggested that I'm indoctrinating young people, that I'm manipulating my fans, that I have no right to express my views as an American citizen. Those aren't questions, those are attacks." The production team was in panic mode now, with producers frantically whispering into headsets and trying to figure out how to salvage what was supposed to be a routine celebrity interview. But Stephanopoulos seemed determined to continue his aggressive approach, perhaps thinking he could still turn the situation to his advantage. "I'm simply trying to hold you accountable for your public statements," he said, his tone suggesting he thought this was a reasonable position. "When you have the platform you have, don't you think you should be more careful about how you use it?" Stress' response was swift and devastating. "Accountable to whom, George? To you? To some arbitrary standard of what celebrities are allowed to think and say? I am accountable to my conscience, to my values, to the principles that guide my life and my work. I am not accountable to journalists who think their job is to police the opinions of their guests." The confrontation had reached a boiling point, with Street standing tall and Stephanopoulos looking increasingly small behind his desk. What had started as an interview had become something else entirely. A clash between two very different philosophies about the role of public figures in society and the responsibilities of journalists to their guests and their audience. The studio atmosphere had become electric with tension, everyone sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented in the usually controlled world of morning television. Stephanopoulos, perhaps realizing that his aggressive strategy was backfiring, but too committed to change course, made what would prove to be his final and most catastrophic mistake. "Meryl, I think you're proving my point here," he said with a smug expression that would haunt his career for years to come. "This emotional outburst is exactly why some people think actors shouldn't be taken seriously when they try to discuss serious issues. You're being dramatic, just like you are in your movies." The words hit the studio like a physical blow. Several crew members audibly gasped. And even the veteran cameraman, who had seen countless interviews go wrong, looked shocked at the blatant disrespect Stephanopoulos had just displayed. But if he expected Stre to crumble or become more emotional, he had fundamentally misunderstood the woman standing before him. Instead, Stre went completely still, her face taking on an expression of icy calm that was somehow more intimidating than any display of anger could have been. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried the force of absolute authority. "Did you just call my response to your attacks an emotional outburst?" she asked, each word precisely enunciated. "Did you just dismiss my legitimate concerns about your conduct as being dramatic? George, in that single statement, you have revealed more about yourself than hours of questioning could ever reveal about me." Stephanopoulos shifted uncomfortably in his chair, perhaps finally beginning to realize that he had crossed a line from which there might be no return. "I'm simply observing that you seem quite upset about some fairly standard journalistic questions." Stre's laugh was cold and sharp. "Standard journalistic questions. George, what you've been doing here today isn't journalism. It's an ambush. Real journalists ask questions to illuminate truth, to help their audience understand their guests better, to explore ideas and perspectives. What you've been doing is trying to trap me, to make me look foolish, to create a viral moment at my expense." The host made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. "Meryl, I think you're being unfair. I'm simply doing my job as a journalist to ask tough questions." That was the moment when Streep's legendary composure finally shattered. Not into emotional breakdown, but into a display of intellectual and moral authority that reminded everyone watching why she was considered one of the greatest actresses of her generation. "Your job," she said, her voice rising for the first time. "George, your job is to inform the public, to facilitate meaningful conversations, to help people understand the world around them better. Your job is not to humiliate your guests, not to twist their words, not to create controversy where none exists. What you've done here today is a betrayal of everything journalism is supposed to represent." Stephanopoulos tried to interrupt, but Street held up her hand with such authority that he actually fell silent. "I am not finished," she said, and the entire studio knew that she meant it. "You invited me here to discuss my work, my craft, the things I care about as an artist and as a human being. Instead, you've spent the entire time attacking my character, questioning my right to have opinions, and suggesting that I am somehow corrupt or manipulative for caring about the world around me. That is not journalism, George. That is character assassination disguised as an interview." The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what was becoming one of the most extraordinary confrontations in morning television history. Stephanopoulos, looking increasingly desperate, made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "Meryl, if you would just sit back down, we can continue this conversation in a more constructive way." Stre's response was swift and final. "There is no constructive way to continue this conversation, George, because you have made it clear that you are not interested in having a conversation at all. You are interested in scoring points, in creating headlines, in advancing your own agenda at my expense. I will not be a party to that." She turned toward the camera, addressing the audience directly with the same presence and authority that had captivated moviegoers for decades. "To anyone watching this, I want you to understand what you've just witnessed. This is what happens when journalism becomes entertainment. When interviewers become attack dogs, when the goal shifts from informing the public to creating viral moments. This is not what good journalism looks like." Stephanopoulos, now looking genuinely panicked, tried one last desperate move. "Meryl, you're under contract for this interview. You can't just leave." The look Streep gave him could have frozen molten steel. "Watch me," she said simply and began walking toward the studio exit. "Security," Stephanopoulos called out, his voice cracking with desperation. "We need security to escort Mississippi Street out of the building." The request hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even the security personnel looked reluctant to get involved, recognizing that forcing one of America's most beloved actresses to leave against her will be a public relations nightmare of epic proportions. But Street turned back one final time, her face showing a mixture of disappointment and disgust that was more devastating than any angry outburst could have been. "George, you have just asked security to remove me from your studio for the crime of refusing to be disrespected on live television. I want everyone to think about that for a moment. You have revealed yourself to be exactly the kind of person who thinks that anyone who challenges your behavior should be forcibly removed. That tells us everything we need to know about your character and about what this show has become. With that, She walked out of the studio with her head held high, leaving behind a host who looked shell-shocked and a crew that seemed uncertain whether they should continue filming or cut away to commercial. The silence that followed her departure was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of her heels clicking down the hallway as she made her way out of the building. Stephanopoulos sat at his desk, staring at the empty chair where one of Hollywood's greatest talents had been sitting just moments before, perhaps finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what had just occurred. The interview that was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance had become something else entirely. A defining moment that would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. A perfect example of how not to treat a guest, and a reminder of why Meryl Streep had earned the respect and admiration of millions of people around the world. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Was Meryl Streep justified in walking out, or should she have stayed to finish the interview? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories from the world of entertainment.